phoned the tracking room and we spoke to an officer there who was obviously the officer of the watch for the day, and told him that we were interested in any object which had descended in South Africa or over South Africa or thereabouts on the date in question. The officer at the other end immediately assumed, because we had come through on an internal telephone, that we were something associated with the military, and he said, if the sort of conversation went something like, yeah, would you just hold on a minute, I'll just check on the computer, sir. And you could actually hear the clicking of the keys in the background. And then some time later, a short time later, he came back and says, yes, an object did come down over the South African continent on the date you are talking about, and in the general area where you're saying. So he said, well, can you tell us what it was that came down? And his reply, which was quite, it startled us really, he said, we don't know what it was. Because I would have thought NORAD would have known everything that's going down, but he said, we don't know what it was.
Unless he's not in a need-to-know position.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. But the point about it is that the NORAD tracked an object going over South African coming into our South African airspace and actually coming down, and that was confirmed by NORAD. So that was just another arrow in the quiver of this whole sequence of events.
Now, just pausing for a moment, there has been some people who suggest that the information that's come out about this South African case was in fact referring to nothing more harmless than some kind of meteorite activity or possibly satellite debris which occurred a year previously in the general area.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Smithsonian Institute, for instance, have put forward information relating to this incident in 1988 on the same day.
Sure.
But did NORAD at any time suggest to you, whilst you were in communication with them, that they were referring to an incident that happened a year previously, or they were definitely referring to an incident that happened just weeks previously?
They were absolutely certain that this was the date and time we were talking about. There was nothing to do with the year before. They were talking about the date we gave them, 7th of May 1989. No question about this at all. Then, once again, it was like everything else, because the whole thing was buzzing by this time in every direction. And usual elements came into the thing which we tend to put down to say disinformation or whatever you want to call it. But certainly things then started to happen which were likely to cause all sorts of problems for us with this.
Tony, can we begin our look at the South African case by perhaps first going back in time to the late autumn of 1989? You had the first indication that something had happened. How did this actually transpire?
Initially, I received a letter from South Africa which intimated that there was a UFO crash in South Africa on the 7th of May 1989. It went into a small amount of detail, briefly telling about the incident, but it was very, very limited in information, but I was told then that there would be follow-up information coming. Sometime after this I received a letter which had, to all intents and purposes, a document which was purported to have been an official South African military document, which was obviously run in parallel with the information given to me in the first letter. And this document told the story of how a UFO was intercepted by South African Mirage jet fighters on the 7th of May 1989, and in consequence of this confrontation, one of these aircraft shot at the UFO with a laser weapon, causing the UFO to go out of control and crash over the border with Botswana.
Now, this letter arrived, was the letter itself anonymous, or was there a name attached to it?
This letter, which arrived initially, came from a person called James van Grunen, a person who at that time stated that he was associated with South African intelligence, and he also said that at a later date he would be coming to England and would like to meet.
Now, he's promised to send further information in this correspondence. This duly arrives. It takes the form of official documentation, but I understand that you were a little bit suspect about some of the quality behind this apparent documentation.
Yes, we were never under any doubt, that there were never under any illusion that this thing was a fake. It was obvious. There were many mistakes on this purported document which the official military documents just wouldn't have. So we're immediately suspicious about the whole thing, and started to sort of analyse, if you like, and wait for this meeting to take place, and ask for more information whereby we can make some inquiries of our own into the thing.
Admit that the document appeared to all intents and purposes a faked document, one of several. There was still sufficient information in there to persuade you to make inquiries. Why was that?
Well, that was interesting because you see, I've got to go forward a bit before I can actually answer this question. What we've got to do is the next thing, which took place very, very quickly afterwards, that the informant actually came to England and we met him face to face. And it was put point blank to him at this time that we were under no illusion that this document was a fake. And therefore, unless something could be given to us which we could independently make inquiries about, we weren't prepared to accept it as being anything being genuine.
I see. What persuaded you more than anything else, either through conversations that you had with James van Grunen, or material contained within the documents and materials that he handed to you, that there was something really tangible, viable to some of the so-called claims that he was trying to get across to you?
Well, it was when other names were given to us of people who, in South Africa, who were still in the South African military, who could confirm that this episode did take place, and we were put in a position where we could actually contact these people. So as a result, well, we have names, and we started to check first of all, and certainly one of the names we were given immediately, and found that this person did work for the South African military in a very sensitive position, and was closely associated with the Intelligence Records Office. So this we confirmed.
But we're getting to the point where some real progress is being made, in the sense that you're actually these names as being genuine persons. These are real names within South African intelligence. I suppose people who hear that will instantly question, how do you get this type of information? You smile. We're all familiar with the various routes and means and so on. But for those people who are not perhaps familiar with the manner in which that kind of information can be created, can you perhaps elaborate a little bit?
All I can tell you is that this thing is not only possible, but it happens, and we're in a position to be able. I'm not prepared to divulge the way it's done. Unfortunately, the only way we can make progress in this UFO game is to make open these avenues of inquiry, which are highly sensitive in many directions. And if we were to give things like this out, then we would have all the UFO groups trying to do the same thing. And once we did this, the whole thing would be lost. And so we've got to, for the benefit of ufology, keep some of these things a secret, if you like.
What other revelations did you manage to obtain from James van Grunen whilst he was over here in England, apart from names?
All I can say is that once we started to check out certain individuals, as I told you before, and found that they were actually working in these sensitive areas. The next course of action, of course, Van Grunen by this time had basically, we were always highly suspicious of this man. We checked on him when he said he was a South African intelligence officer. Obviously that was one of the first checks was made, and of course this was immediately shot down by the South African authorities, saying this is not the case, he is not associated with us that way. But then we made contact with certainly the first person who very sensitive areas in the South African intelligence. And this man was very, very shocked when we contacted him and told him that we were aware of the South African incident and that we had been told about the incident by a colleague who was from South Africa.
Would you say that he was pretty certain that that colleague could have been James Van Grunen, or might it have been somebody else? Did you actually tell him that he'd been to England?
He knew it was Van Grunen straight away.
But that didn't obviously come from you.
No. That's the whole point of it. Yeah, he knew that this must have come from Van Grunen. And that is what made the thing very, very interesting, because he was very, very upset the fact that we'd been in a position to contact him to start with. And that the information in relation to this incident had actually leaked out. And as far as he was concerned, it was a betrayal of confidential information which he had actually spoken to Van Grunen about. And the point about it was, once he knew we were aware of the situation, he then said, well, okay, you know about it now, the incident, and of course he goes into the security leaking aspect of things and the danger associated with this. But he then did say, well, look, okay, I have seen the whole file on this thing. This thing certainly did happen. We have photographs, we've got official photographs of the downed craft, we've got official photographs of the aliens, etc., etc. And then we said to him, well, we would deal in, another thing he said that they got us a telex message which ran to about 70 pages, which had been sent from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in America, giving instructions to the South African authorities on how to proceed in this particular case, how you deal with this type of thing when you're confronted with it. He then said that after a sort of long conversation, he said he would be prepared, was in a position and would be prepared to copy the telex message, the photographs and all documents appertaining to the crash. But for him to do this, he said he would be placing himself at great risk and would want something for this. We then said, well, what exactly would you like for this? Thinking he was going to ask for a large sum of money. But he didn't. He said, can you find out, are you in a position to give me information on a secret project in England called T-47? Well, we said we could get this information and let him have it in exchange for the UFO information.
But presumably you didn't have an idea at the time what T-47 was.
That's the whole point about it. We hadn't a clue what he was talking about. But of course, to get our hands on these documents, which of course would have meant so much, we would have told him anything at that moment in time. Whether that appears dishonest or not, I don't know, but there's only one way you're ever going to get the truth of this thing, and you've got to take whatever course of action is necessary. And as far as we were concerned, that was necessary in them circumstances. So that's what happened. We said, yes, we can get this information, and we will exchange this information to you for the South African information of the crash. But the stipulation we made, of course, was that we needed all the documents and the photographs in our hands before we exchange information. We must see these first. And obviously, I mean, we didn't, as I say, we didn't know what T-47 was, but it was something obviously in reference to this country. And there is no way on this earth we would ever give anybody, even if we had this kind of information, there's no way on this earth we'd ever do something like that. But it was a means to an end. And so he says, yes, okay, I will put this in an envelope. It will not have a return address on for obvious reasons. It will be sent to you, and you should have it within 7 or 8 days. Which is great. We thought, this is it. He did actually go into certain lengths to describe what was on some of the photographs. And
What were the sort of things that he described?
Well, first of all, he said there were photographs of the UFO in position on the ground where it had come to rest, where it crashed. There was photographs of the UFO after recovery. There was photographs of 2 aliens. All sorts of things like this.
How did he actually sound to you when he was describing this? Was it sort of matter of fact, or was he talking in excited terms?
No, it was matter of fact. Clinical. No question about that at all. It was as if he did actually mention at the time. He said, "Well, you know, this isn't the first crash we've had." He said, "This is this is the current one." He said, "But there has been other crashes." And that's the way he was talking. But he didn't talk, as if there was anything extraordinary about it. This is what I couldn't find. He talked almost as if it was the norm.
Mm.
But anyway, he's promised to put these things in the envelope and send them to us, and on the understand that we would immediately send him back information on this T-47 business, which we said we would. So that was where that particular conversation finished. Now, I think this was probably the moment when we made our biggest mistake. Obviously, we were trying to further our inquiries, and amongst the information we had in our hands was information of certain people from America who had actually flown out to South Africa as a team to assist the South Africans in the recovery of the downed craft. And when I say recovery, I mean the craft had already been recovered to a South African Air Force base, but the South Africans, in view of there being live alien creatures on board, were not didn't know quite how to handle this. So what happened was 2 C-5 Galaxy aircraft did come out from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, carrying a team of people who were obviously very, very conversant in dealing with this kind of situation. And we had names of some of the team that came out. And so what we decided to do, we would check some of these names to make sure these gelled with what had been told to us. And the first one we went to went direct to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and once again we got directly, not through the telephone switchboard, but directly into the Office of Special Investigation, and asked for a name of Mr. Van Buren.
This is Van Buren, not Van Buren. No coincidence. Was he presumably then not a South African?
That's right. He was American. Now. We asked for Mr. Van Buren, and Mr. Van Buren came on the phone, which once again was another little nail in the coffin of confirmation. And he was told straight away that we were aware of the UFO crash in South Africa, and that we were aware that he had been present there, and various other things in relation to it. And this man was obviously physically shaken by this. There's no question about that, because of his manner, his attitude and everything else. His first reply to this was, "Where did you get this information from?" He said this twice, "Where did you get this information from?" And he was told that we had sources associated with the South African military who had given us this information. And then he said several very interesting things in relation to this. He never once denied that this thing had occurred. What he said was, he says, "Look, you've got to understand that I'm a civilian, first of all. I work for the American military, American military intelligence." He says, "I am a civilian, but I am governed by the rules of secrecy." He says, "And I must tell you that I am not allowed to give you information, or I'm not allowed to give the public information," he said, "in relation to this subject." He said, it's not permitted for me to discuss things like this with you." And so he said, "There's no way I'm going to say one way or the other whether what you're saying is true or otherwise." He said, I'm neither going to confirm nor deny this thing." Now that in itself told a story. I mean, why didn't he just turn around and say, "Well, this is rubbish, it never happened"? This wasn't the case. This man was physically, no doubt about this, he was physically shaken by what we'd said. Now, so the conversation went on, and it was, as far as I'm concerned, to listen to that conversation, there was no doubt in my mind this incident had occurred, and this man had been part of it. So at the end of that conversation, we thought, great, we've made another. Now there really is, something here in this. And so we have two things going at the moment. We've got this conversation with this chap. We've got the so-called file and photographs supposedly on their way from South Africa. But that was the point it all started to go wrong. because as a result of that call to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, they immediately got in touch with the South African authorities, and all hell was let loose. Now the contact who we'd phoned in South Africa about the photographs and everything else, he phoned us in a real panic. He says, "You've no idea what you have done." He says, you've caused more trouble than you can imagine." We said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "You have been in touch with the authorities in America, they have been in touch with our authorities over here, and our authorities are now aware that there's been a leak about this South African crash." He said, "And there's all hell on over here." He said, "And I just dare not at this moment in time get near that file to do the copying and everything else for you." He said, "There's no way." He said, "It's too hot to handle." And he said, "On top of that," he says, "I do not wish to speak to you anymore." He says, "Because I am in too much danger now." And this man was really panicking. He was frightened. So that, at the end of that conversation, we once again, everything tells a story, and that told us again that it really had.
I understand you also made some inquiries into through sources over here into what the T-47 might actually be,
Yeah.
and you found out precisely what it was.
That's right, we did, yeah. And I was quite shaken by it, to be honest, because T-47 was the actual new design of the new Challenger tank, the one with the new armour on, and I was quite amazed about this, you know. And but by that time, by the time we'd found out this kind of information, it was due to become public anyway. It wasn't as it was a big secret, but obviously over there they knew about this thing and they'd known about it for some time. So then it once again it added credibility that they were actually after information on this thing in exchange for the UFO information.
Perhaps it's an opportune time, Tony, to just go back somewhat to when, according to the information that's now flowing to a point, this UFO appeared in South African airspace and the like, because I believe that mere fact that this UFO was tracked on radar, according to the documents, and perhaps you'll mention something about that, led you to make some inquiries to NORAD. Can you just take us through the actual movements of this UFO before it came to rest in the Kalahari Desert in Botswana? And what were the kind of reactions both on the ground and indeed at NORAD?
Yeah, well, of course the first intimation that there was this UFO was in the air was when it was actually picked up at sea by a vessel which was given, the name given to us, it was a South African naval ship, and it was called the Tafelberg. Now, apparently this ship picked up a fast-travelling UFO travelling at a great rate of knots towards the South African coastline. They got in touch with Cape Town, told them what they got on their radars, and asked them if they'd got it on the land-based radars, and they immediately told them, yes, we are watching this thing. It's coming towards us very fast. We are in control. As a result of this thing still coming forward, and it was something which was not a known aircraft in as much as it wasn't a friendly, messages were relayed out to this thing, challenge messages, and no response was received. So they scrambled two South African Mirage jet fighters on an intercept course. Because of the speed that the object was travelling, it wasn't possible to get behind and chase it. It was a case of intercepting it on its trajectory as it came towards them. The two fighters went up towards on an intercept course with this UFO. The leading plane was piloted by, in English terms, squadron leader Goosen. They don't call him squadron leader in South Africa, but that is, I'll use the English term so that we're more conversant with it. The two aircraft closed on the object, or the object closed on the aircraft, and they gave various challenges which once again they did not receive any response. Now one of the aircraft, the leading aircraft, had on its wings, mounted on its wings, an experimental laser cannon, and it was at this point when the squadron leader was saying that they were getting no response. What action do I take? And they said to fire on it. The ground control told him to fire on it, which he did. He fired once at this thing, and apparently there was a blinding flash, the object started to go on an erratic course as if it was going out of control and started to descend rapidly. The two planes followed the direction the object was taking and observed the thing actually crash, come to ground just over the South African border with Botswana, and it landed just inside the Botswana border. This information was relayed back to the headquarters, and the aircraft described that the details of the object, and that it was now down on the ground, and of course response teams were immediately sent.
Right. Now, although Van Grunen referred, and quite a few people have referred to some kind of laser weapon being fired at the object,
No.
you actually made inquiries and found that it wasn't actually called a laser weapon. What precisely was it that brought the UFO down?
Yeah, the weapon which the aircraft had mounted on the wing, it was Maser, M-A-S-E-R. This was my mistake, and I'd never heard of a Maser weapon, to be totally honest. The only thing I heard of was a Maser, and assumed this was a laser weapon. It was a Maser weapon, which is the molecular amplifier for microwave radiation. In other words, this machine on the wing of this aircraft was capable of firing a beam of high power microwaves, and this is apparently what it did quite successfully. It didn't blow a hole in the craft or anything like that. What it did, it sent the thing out of control, which would imply that it's probably interfered with the drive system of the thing.
Now, did you, having had the name of the squadron leader who fired at this UFO, did you make any efforts to contact this person to find out if he existed and to know whether or not this part of the case was true or not? Yes,
we did. Once again, there are people who out there will say, well, the methods we use are really not kosher at times, but if you want to get to the truth of things, there are certain courses of action you have to take at certain times. The thing was, what we did, we contacted the Air Force Base. We actually, first of all, had to make sure that we could locate this squadron leader. Once again, we had to find out whether there was such a squadron leader. And what we did, we got in touch with the South African intelligence, would you believe, and told them, this is absolutely true, that we had, the person speaking to them had been in the English Royal Air Force and had been a great friend of Squadron Leader Goosen for many years, and had lost contact with him and wondered whether they knew the location of him at this current time, as that we would like to renew our acquaintance with him as old friends. And after a short time, the voice said, at the time the voice said, could you just hang on a moment? And after 2 or 3 minutes, this person came back and said, yes, Squadron Leader Goosen is now stationed at such and such an air force base, you see. So we thought, great. We now know there is such a squadron leader, and we now know where the base is at. So it was only then a matter of contacting the Air Force Base and asking for the squadron leader to get the information we required. And what we did, we phoned the Air Force Base, asked for the squadron leader, who it was put through to him. He answered the telephone, and what we did was, one of our people who has spent many years in America, who has a strong American accent, spoke to the squadron leader and claimed that he was an American general who had the file in relation to the UFO crash on his desk in America, and that he was a bit confused because the file didn't state how many times the squadron leader had shot at the craft.
Was this American general's name, did that appear on any of the documents?
No.
So,
basically the American general's name was picked out of the air.
Right.
And at first the squadron leader said, who did you say was speaking, sir? And the name was repeated, and of course, and it was in a brusque way, as a general would be, and also said to this South African squadron leader, surely squadron leader, it doesn't take you, and what I want to know is how many times you fired at the damn thing. I'm not asking anything else. How many times did you fire the damn thing? And the squadron leader immediately came back and he said, I fired once, sir. And then the squadron leader was obviously feeling a bit itchy about this, because he said, would you mind hanging on while I go to a safe phone? And our end just said to him, no thank you very much, squadron leader, you've answered our question. So that was a confirmation from that source.
Well, now, people may find it surprising that somebody in his position in the South African Air Force would willingly divulge that kind of information. Did the person who was representing the American general, or pretending to be the American general, did he actually use a code name or a file name to get that information out of the squadron leader? In other words, was there something more substantive?
Yeah. Yes, he did. He used the code name which we had on the file, and of course this immediately told the squadron leader at the other end that this man, he had the file in his hands to all intents and purposes, yeah, and that is the reason he actually, even then he was uneasy about answering without going to a safe phone, but he did answer the question because our general was a bit belligerent, and so he got the answer he required. He said he fired once at this thing.
What was the name of the file?
Silver Diamond.
Now, Silver Diamond, I think you've got your own particular theories about why the file might have been called that.
Well, they're not my theories. They're good ideas, basically. They came. I think it was from Mark Birdsall who actually put this together, and it's interesting because, first of all, if you think about it, the American side, the Americans have always referred to their silver dollar, and the South Africans have always been famous for their diamonds. So if you put a combination of the two together, is it possible you could have a silver diamond? I don't know, but it's interesting.
Yeah. So now we've got confirmation of a sort coming from the United States with Van Brunen, who insists that he's a civilian working for the military, but he's not prepared to divulge too much. You've spoken with the squadron leader Goosen. You've had contact with South African intelligence, but I think you also made inquiries of NORAD. What actually transpired there?
Yeah, we did. Well, once again, we had the ability or the facility, whatever you want to call it, to get straight through into the NORAD tracking room, and to do that, you've got to have the internal telephone numbers so that you don't go through a switchboard. Now, this is exactly what we did, and we phoned the tracking room, and we spoke to an officer there who was obviously the officer of the watch for the day, and told him that we were interested in any object which had descended in South Africa or over South Africa or thereabouts on the date in question. The officer at the other end immediately assumed, because we had come through on an internal telephone, that we were something associated with the military, and he said, the sort of conversation went something like, yeah, would you just hold on a minute, I'll just check on the computer, sir. And you could actually hear the clicking of the keys in the background, and then some time later, a short time later, he came back and says, yes, an object did come down over the South African continent on the date you are talking about, and in the general area where you're saying. So he said, well, can you tell us what it was that came down? And his reply, which was quite, it startled us really, he said, we don't know what it was. Because I would have thought NORAD would have known everything that's going down, but he said, we don't know what it was.
Unless he's not in a need-to-know position.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. But the point about it is that the NORAD tracked an object going over South African coming into our South African airspace and actually coming down, and that was confirmed by NORAD. So that was just another arrow in the quiver of this whole sequence of events.
Now, just pausing for a moment, there has been some people who suggest that the information that's come out about this South African case was in fact referring to nothing more harmless than some kind of meteorite activity or possibly satellite debris which occurred a year previously in the general area. Now, the Smithsonian Institute, for instance, have put forward information relating to this incident in 1988 on the same day.
Sure.
But did NORAD at any time suggest to you, whilst you were in communication with them, that they were referring to an incident that happened a year previously, or they were definitely referring to an incident that happened just weeks previously?
They were absolutely certain that this was the date and time we were talking about. There was nothing to do with the year before. They were talking about the date we gave them, 7th of May 1989. No question about this at all. Then, once again, it was like everything else, because the whole thing was buzzing by this time in every direction. And usual elements came into the thing which we tend to put down to, say, disinformation or whatever you want to call it. But certainly things then started to happen which were likely to cause all sorts of problems for us with this. And where we were getting calls from the South African Embassy.
Was this while James Van Grunen was still in this country?
Absolutely, yes. There was a call received at 2 o'clock in the morning from the South African Embassy demanding to speak to Van Grunen, and Van Grunen was put on the telephone, and he was physically frightened. When he came off that phone, he was physically frightened, no doubt about that at all. Then another call came through in the early hours of the same morning. This was after the South African Embassy incident. This was from an actual military commander in South Africa, and this man was, no question about this, his actual tone was belligerent. He didn't request to speak to Van Grunen, he demanded that he be brought to the phone, and there was nothing polite about this man. I demand to speak to Van Grunen. Van Grunen was once again put on the telephone, and by the time he came away from that telephone, he was terrified. So these were the type of things that had started to develop by this stage with this thing.
Did you actually get to discover any of the names of these people at the embassy here in London?
Associated with?
Well, their actual backgrounds. I mean, did Van Grunen, for instance, give you a name? Somebody's on the phone from the South African Embassy. Was there any checks to make sure that these were actual calls from the embassy?
Oh, absolutely, yes. It's because there were names of people that we knew, actually knew were at the embassy, and of course we would have checked them anyway. We missed nothing. But it was interesting because we started, we'd put feelers out in several directions, having people, how can I say, in positions where they could see correspondence of a sensitive nature in one country and several. And it was at this time we started to get things fed back to us in relation to this incident. And one of the things that were fed back to us was where a Colonel Blackmore from the South African intelligence, who was working out of the South African Embassy in London, had sent a message to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base asking about various information in relation to how can I put this? Asking for details of the information and what was developing as a result of the thing being released.
Was Colonel Blackmore privy to all of the information, do you think? Or was he possibly being instructed by Pretoria?
Yeah, I'm sure that is the case. I don't think he would have been aware at all of this incident until this thing broke. Then I think he would have been made privy to a small amount of this. And the thing about it is, first of all, the South African Embassy in London is not allowed to have a any military personnel working at that embassy. They're not allowed this under the constitutional law because of the situation as it was in South Africa at that time. So we did check up on this name Blackmore and found that there was definitely a Mr. Blackmore who was working out of the South African Embassy in London. No doubt about that at all. We found out about him and some of his background as well, which proved to us that name was there. So once again we've got another name coming out. Nothing to do with the initial information. And so we checked this chap out, and so he was certainly active at that moment in time out at the South African Embassy in London. But as I say, they weren't allowed to have anybody with a military title there. But as far as we're concerned, arose by any other name. And he had sent to America, as I say, asking various questions about how the information had leaked out and various courses of action in relation to it. So once again, that was then checked out. But we started to receive further documents in relation to the incident, which came from America and other places, and things which told about the project. Another interesting thing, you see, which came out of all this was that we also had several code words given to us. There was a basic overall code word for this, but like any other big military operation, particularly sensitive ones, you are given a basic overall code word, and then you are given several code words. The thing is then fragmented, if you like, and each fragment is given a code word of its own for security reasons. And we were given one particular code word which meant more to us than the others at that time for a particular reason, and this was Project Pantry. And we were told about this Project Pantry, and we had it written down with amongst all the documents we have here. But in the meantime, suddenly from America, one of our contacts out there who is in one of these sensitive areas had sent us a document, and it was headed Project Pantry. And basically Project Pantry was actually the security operation which was taken out to protect the whole of the UFO incident and to shroud it in secrecy. And of course Project Pantry was the name given to that secrecy. And I suppose when you look at pantry where you keep things, I don't know, but that was the name anyway. But the interesting thing was we'd been given that name initially, and that name had never been used, and suddenly we get the document through from America which talks about Project Pantry, and it talks about that the two English people who have been liaising with the South African intelligence officer in relation to the crash UFO out there, and that the thing must be, they even talk about the UFO being moved to a more secure location because of the leaks, security leaks. So that was another one that tied up. And this was one of once again one of a whole string of things that came up.
Yes, I understand that even here in England, just prior to your first public lecture in Ossett here in West Yorkshire about the South African affair, you were approached by Harry Harris, the Manchester-based solicitor, who had some interesting information to impart.
Yes, it was interesting, was this, because once again, you know, how far can you stretch coincidence? Harry got in touch with me. He'd heard about, from, I don't know how he got it, but he'd heard that I had got information about a crashed UFO in South Africa. Now that was all he knew. He knew nothing more than this. And he said, well, it's very, very interesting this. He says, because one of my contacts was talking to me recently, and he was saying that there was a document, a telex document, which had emanated in America. And this telex was 90 pages long and referred to a UFO crash which had occurred in South Africa. Now the friend who told Harry Harris this had actually had sight of this document, having been shown to him by his friend. So once again we have this thing about the 90-page document.
Now, who was this friend?
No comment.
Can you, no comment?
No comment.
But I think it would be fair to say that Middle East intelligence sources have a part to play here. Would that be fair to say?
There's a lot of intelligence sources got no part to play here.
Okay, all right. Now, you've spoken about this publicly for the first time. We're in September 1989. The South African case is very hot. Then you travel to Frankfurt in Germany for a major UFO World Conference. And there I understand you met Wendell Stevens, the retired Air Force colonel from the United States. Yeah. And he had some interesting information to impart as well.
That's right, yeah. Well, Wendell Stevens, of course, had no knowledge about my lecture on the South African case until we met there. And Wendell got me on one side when I was there, and he says, it's very, very interesting, is this? He says, because I am aware from some of my contacts in America who have already informed me that the South Africans and the Americans had been liaising. He said, and that the American authorities had given some advanced technology equipment to the South Africans in exchange for a recovered UFO and aliens. He said, I had been told this from my American sources. He said, before I even came here today to meet you. He said, so that is very, very interesting. This gels or marries up with what you're saying. So that was another interesting aspect of the thing.
But didn't you also receive some rather unusual attention at this Frankfurt conference? I seem to recall that there were some rather shady characters there.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting, really, because apart from anything else, the first thing that happened when I was getting up to the on the stage to lecture was that the virtually all the officials from the South African embassy descended on the conference and sat in the audience, and there were various American officials also who were known to some of the lecturers to be intelligence also appeared. And so the first thing we did when we got up onto the stage there was to actually welcome the members of the South African embassy, and of course the American gentlemen from the American intelligence agency were also there. So it was quite funny, really, but they certainly were there, no question about that.
So now we have this huge interest being shown in the South African case. A lot of incredulous comments from the UFO community worldwide, but they haven't presumably anything like the knowledge that you and your colleagues who are working on this case have got about it. So let's go back to the South African incident itself. I think we've established that something happened. Now, what exactly did happen according to the reports and the information that came in? We know that the object has been seen and sighted on radar. We know that there's been confirmation of that through NORAD. It's come down into the desert of Botswana. What, according to your information, gleaned over this period, exactly happened next?
Well, once the object had come down, retrieval teams were actually mobilised immediately, and they set off towards the direction of the craft. And the information is another item of information was that there was actually a helicopter crash with its crew, who were one of the first to respond to this thing. And apparently, when they got to the scene, they actually overflew the downed UFO, but at very, very close range. And as they flew over the UFO, the electronics of the helicopter actually packed in, and the whole thing crashed to the ground, and they reckon the crew was killed. And after that, the thing was approached a great deal more cautiously from a point of view. No more helicopters were allowed in the area, anything like this, and any aerial activity was told to remain at distance. And when they arrived, also the mechanical vehicles, which were heavy lifting vehicles and all this kind of business, which went to the scene, they found that as they got closer to the thing, they started to have electrical trouble. So what they did, they stopped the vehicles as close as they could get without interference. And apparently there was a call sent back for some substance to be actually brought out to the scene. And I don't know what the substance was, but apparently it ended up being painted on the outside of the object, the craft. And this tended to neutralise whatever the effect the craft was creating. And the whole thing was painted in this substance. And then the vehicles, etc., were able to get closer to it.
What kind of crash scene are we looking at here, Tony? Are we looking at something where there is a great deal of destruction, or with hundreds or thousands of fragments, or are we looking at something which has more or less survived intact?
Yeah. Well, no, there's no question about it. The thing has survived intact. It's gouged a great crater as it's hit the ground, slid along, and then come to a grinding halt as it's dug an enormous hole. but the craft itself was in one piece. And the only obvious sign of damage to it was that there was one telescopic leg protruding, as if the crash or whatever had activated the thing to come out. And so there you've got a craft tilted on one side with one telescopic leg extended. But other than that, no obvious damage.
So this material has been painted over the vehicle.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that the South African intelligence contact suggested that this wasn't the first UFO crash incident that had occurred. Could it be then that this is a material that they've used previously, or was it perhaps at that point, having lost a helicopter in those circumstances, that a message for advice was dispatched to the United States? How do we deal with this type of problem?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. It could well be what you're saying. I don't know one way or the other. All I know is that this material arrived at the scene not a long time afterwards. I would have had a tendency to believe that they actually had this substance and brought it directly out as a result of this type of activity. But having said that, it could have been the way you say it. It doesn't take long for them to get onto the phone to America and ask what do we do with this situation, and then have this stuff, I don't know, mixed, painted, or whatever they do with these things. I don't know, I'm no scientist, but I certainly think that the one certain thing is that something did come out which was painted on there and it was effective. So somebody knew what they were doing.
Have we any idea of the kind of numbers that were at the site at this period of time? Were there, for instance, just military teams, or were there actual specialists of one kind or another?
I understand that there were military personnel. Certainly there were people who were obviously driving the heavy transport, people who were capable of using the heavy lifting apparatus. There were, without question, scientists there. I think we had a mix. I think the scientists were certainly associated with the military anyway. I think the whole thing was a military operation, without question.
But nonetheless, this is in another country. It's in Botswana.
Sure.
Was it,
Sure.
to your knowledge, a problem for the South Africans at this stage? Were there any villagers, for instance, nearby who might have seen something? What happened in those circumstances?
The only thing I know about that particular aspect of things is that there were reports of if you like, a ball of light being seen by certain people, South Africans, around the time of this crash. From the reports, the thing came down in a reasonably remote area, and whether there were any sort of natives and that living in that vicinity, I honestly don't know. But I do know that that particular part of it was sealed off very, very quickly. And there is nothing to indicate that the South Africans sought permission from the Botswanan authorities to remove the thing. And there's nothing to indicate that this was the case. It may have taken place, this, because I'm certain that the Botswana authorities wouldn't have had a clue as to what to do with this thing anyway, because I mean the South Africans are far, far more technologically advanced anyway. So whether they did actually ask permission or whether they just went straight in and snatched it from over the border, I don't know.
Have we any idea how long the actual recovery took in terms of hours? Was it fairly quickly over a period of a day or two? Or?
From what I am told, it took several hours, quite a few hours. But that's just, once again, I haven't got a great deal of information on that particular aspect of it. Certainly, they had to wait for this stuff to be brought out. They had to wait for this to be painted onto the machine. And then eventually it was physically lifted.
How was it actually transported back into South African territory?
Well, I understand that at that time they actually had heavy lifting helicopters brought to the thing to lift it. And it was taken back by that method. But there's not too much information on the actual retrieval known, apart from being at the scene and the things that occurred at the scene. And of course it wasn't until they actually got it back to the American Air Force Base that up to this time, nobody, I don't think, had even considered the possibility of somebody being inside it.
Were there any efforts made to enter the vehicle?
No.
In the Kalahari region?
No. That's the interesting thing. And I suppose when you think about it, all they were interested in doing is getting this thing back to the Air Force Base quickly. And that may have been part of the snatching process, to snatch it out of Botswana. But it wasn't until they got it back to the Air Force Base in South Africa where the thing had been put down and basically looking at it, suddenly there was a sound came from it, and a door started to open in the side of it, but it only opened a few inches, and it was obviously something which had occurred as a result of the impact, where there was something jammed, so the door could only open a slight amount. So what they did, they used hydraulic gear to actually force the door open. And it was at that point, when they got the door forced open, that these two aliens came staggering out of it, two little guys. Now it was apparent to those watching, from the information I was given straight away from the outset, that one of these aliens was quite badly injured. The other one seemed to be okay, but appeared to be giving some sort of assistance to the injured one. And in the meantime, of course, when this occurred, they actually they were immediately taken under guard, the aliens, and a very, very quick makeshift medical facility was put together. I don't know how they did it, but it was on the Air Force Base, where doctors were told to put this thing together to accommodate these two aliens. It was basically to isolate them more than anything else, I think. But I understand that the doctors did try to give some form of assistance to this injured creature, but as doctors do, they approached the creature with a view to taking a blood sample, you know, with the old hypodermic and that, and the creature reacted immediately and attacked one of the doctors, who received very serious lacerations to the face and chest. And at that time the doctors backed off, of course.
Had been removed to a medical facility. Were the Americans actually there at this time?
A short time afterwards. There wasn't a great deal of time afterwards, but they certainly arrived a short time afterwards, and until the American people arrived, everything was put on hold. Nothing was done about the craft itself, and it wasn't until the American contingent arrived they seemed to immediately take over the proceedings. And it was at that stage they were seen to be entering the craft and removing various items of technology from within the craft, that this was done solely by the Americans.
Were there any medical staff from the United States there as well?
I understand that there were people there who knew about how to handle these aliens, yes.
Now, the question is, how long was it before the Americans took it upon themselves to remove everything lock, stock and barrel back to the United States?
Well, that wasn't very long, because it seems that the whole thing would already been totally planned before their arrival, exactly what action they would take when they arrived there. And the whole thing seemed to be geared up as if it was a coordinated plan. There was no, when they arrived, stopping to discuss how they were going to do things. The things seemed to take place automatically, and then everything was put on board the Galaxy aircraft, the C5s, and transported back to Wright-Patterson with all due haste.
Now, there were some dates that were mentioned in terms of this transportation. Did you actually make inquiries with your sources in the United States to find out whether or not it might be possible to learn as to whether or not these aircraft duly arrived on that particular date at Wright-Patterson?
Yes, we did. We checked this out, and they did arrive on that particular date. And the thing about it was, there was an alert status put on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on that date, and it was under the heading defence conditions. That was the code word they used, which is when they put some on high alert.
So we could say with reasonable certainty then that for defence conditions to exist at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, most people on the base would be familiar that there was some kind of high security operation taking place, but again, because of the sprawling mass of the base and the fact that there are tens of thousands of personnel there, not everybody would be privy to what that kind of security alert was based upon. Yes,
absolutely, and that is the reason it's done. We come back to the usual thing, the compartmentalisation again. And when a defence conditions alert is put on the camp, as they are from time to time, what happens is that all they know is that the base is brought onto a higher state of alert, and nobody except the selected few are aware why. And as you quite rightly said, because of the enormous size of this base, it is possible C5 Galaxies and things like this are taking off and landing there all the time. And the status which the camp was on at that time was increased security. This would be everything from the gates, people coming through the gates. There would be much stricter checks and everything else. And but a great many on the camp wouldn't be aware of the reason why, as is normal.
I'm sure a lot of people will be interested to know what kind of descriptions of the aliens actually exist. Can you give any information regarding that?
Yes, indeed. What we got basically, we had two small creatures in the region of about 3'6" tall. They had very large black almond-shaped eyes. They were totally devoid of hair, and they had very, very slim arms and legs. They had 2 arms, 2 legs, the same as a human being, but they were very, very slim with the arms and legs, and both the fingers and the toes were webbed. They had the very slightest nose, if you like. It was very, very hardly noticeable, and just a slit for the mouth, and no ears. That was basically the description.
Would you say that that is a common grey in terms of that description?
Yes, indeed. But it is an interesting fact, is this, and this is something which has only developed very, very recently. We're talking a long time after the event. That 2 Arab gentlemen turned up in London at the Hilton Hotel several months ago, 3 or 4 months ago, and they actually had some photographs in their possession of a landed UFO which had landed in the desert, and aliens stood outside the UFO, and these aliens were absolutely identical to the ones described in the South African case. I'm only mentioning this because of this. They were absolutely identical to the ones mentioned in the South African case, but they are the ones that we normally refer to as the Greys.
Why is it, do you think, that Wright-Patterson features so heavily in UFO events like this, Tony? I think you've made some inquiries about that particular aspect of it, and would I be right in saying that Wright-Patterson's interest in UFOs extends back many, many years?
Yes, that's a fact. There is no question in my mind. Apart from the Soviet authorities, who've no doubt got their own places which deal with this particular type of the side of things, there is nowhere in the world that is advanced as Wright-Patterson are in dealing with UFOs, aliens, or whatever you want to call it. They are without question the most advanced in this field. It is to my knowledge from people who worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I mean, when I say that worked there, I mean in relation to the UFO scenario, that the Americans were involved in UFOs in 1900, and that they were aware that alien piloted vehicles were overflying our airspace as far back as 1900. That is an absolute fact, and they have been keeping files since that time. They even hold files there in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. This is absolute certainty. From what I've been told from people who are part of the teams, referring back as far as Christopher Columbus, when he wrote in the logbooks when his ships were approaching America, that they were being buzzed by these balls of light, which of course we commonly call UFOs.
Can you give us any indication as to who's passed that information on?
All I can say is that the person who used to be involved in the investigation of UFOs, and I'm talking about before 1947 and Roswell and all that, now what's his name now, Dr. Loading, he was the person responsible for this, and even going back into the early 30s they had filing cabinets full of documents in relation to UFOs at that time. And Dr. Loading at that time used to say to only to people in very strict confidence, other military people, and this is, believe me, this has come from a military person who was associated, a good friend of Dr. Loading. Dr. Loading always used to quote, "It's a damn good job that these things are not hostile, because they are so technologically advanced as we wouldn't stand a chance if they were hostile towards us." And that is at that time.
Do we know from sources what happened thereafter, after this UFO vehicle and its occupants arrived at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? Have we got further down the chain?
No, unfortunately, because as I told you before, once we started phoning Wright-Patterson, things like that's when they put the cat amongst the pigeons. Everything was tightened up, everybody was warned. It was to my knowledge that South Africa who we still have contacts with various people in the military there. They contact us occasionally, but only when they can get out of South Africa. They won't contact us from within South Africa. They're frightened of being found out. And everybody in any position of responsibility within the South African military who would have known anything about this case was warned severely of the consequences of any more information leaking out. So they were certainly told this, no question about that at all. But from Wright Patterson point of view, their security is so good over there that, once again, as you said, this is an enormous base where they have very, very high security areas where only a selected few people know what is going on within those particular areas. They're past masters at this. They've had a lot of time to get this thing together.
Now, you've spoken already about the enormous number of, for want of a better word, coincidences that have steadily built up this information over a period of months and now, of course, years. I understand there was an even stranger coincidence which took place at a meeting in London not all that long ago.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because we have never ever left this South African incident alone. Even though time has passed on it, we have delved and we have pushed and we've done all sorts of things to try to make further breakthroughs. And this was a particularly good one, because in London, obviously there are representatives from God knows how many nations which serve at various embassies, etc. And from time to time they have diplomatic dinners whereby the representatives from all the embassies get together and their friends and all this kind of business. Now, some of my friends are part of this circuit, if you like. And on one occasion, one of my close friends was actually at one of these diplomatic dinners, actually sitting at the same table, there was a half a dozen around the table, as the Minister for the Environment for Botswana. And my friend said during the course of this dinner, it is to my knowledge that this thing crashed in South Africa on the Botswana border. Are you aware of it, you see? And of course this chap immediately smiled and said, well, this sounds a load of rubbish to me, I'd never heard of any such thing. Anyway, my colleague was persistent. He said, well, I'm telling you, we have this information and that everything points that this has happened, you see. So this chap from the Botswana government says, well, look, I'm going back to Botswana in the next few days and I will be over there for a couple of weeks or so and then I'll come back. He said, I'll make inquiries about it. He said, but I'm telling you, it's rubbish. Anyway, eventually this several weeks passed and another of these dinners took place. And during the course of this particular function, my friend was there again, and so was this Minister for the Environment from Botswana, and he caught the attention of my friend and says, could I have a word with you? And so my friend, okay, sure. And he says, well, look, he says, I've been back home and I made inquiries about this incident crashing on the borders of Botswana. He says, and I have been told that this actually took place. He said, it's very, very secret. He says, what I can't understand is how the hell did you find out about something like this when I couldn't find out about it? I'm a minister for the country. He said, how could you get this before I did? All he did, he confirmed that this thing had taken place. And this man's name is Mr. Dothoko Saiso, His Excellency Mr. Dothoko Saiso, the Minister for the Environment for Botswana, and he confirmed that this crash did take place.
Now, a number of other researchers have made tentative inquiries into the South African affair. Margaret Fry, who's based in Wales, I believe, she received correspondence from a contact in South Africa who basically said, this is too hot to handle, keep off. Cynthia Hind has had a fair bit to say and write about over the South African case in the last few years as well. And again, the evidence points to there being some kind of incident, but always there is this this feeling that people who make inquiries are being warned off. Now, you've actually experienced that at close quarters. Can you perhaps elaborate on that for us?
Most certainly. The thing is, if you live in these countries, i.e. when we talk about the actual inquiries done from within the country, i.e. Cynthia Hind, who is a good researcher in her own right, there's no question about this. When you live within a country where the security is so tight, if you start to do things which are likely to rock the security boat, you are going to be in very great danger. And people who live out there, they back off. They say, no, there's no way. No, I am not risking my life for something like this, which is understandable. Now, it's a bit different when you go out of their country to other countries. They probably don't enforce their security, so how can I say, strictly in as much as they would take action against you if you did something to release information they didn't want to release. And I'm not saying they wouldn't take action against you in another country, they would, but I think it would be much more subtle. But I certainly was, when I went to America and I spoke at the Tucson conference, I was certainly taken on one side by two members of the CIA who, I was lecturing on the South African case incidentally, and they did warn me in no uncertain terms to be very, very careful what I was doing, as that I would be in great danger, and always to be very cautious as to what I was saying. So, and I've had, of course, various death threats over the telephone. But those sort of things don't stop you, or they don't stop me, and we just carry on regardless. But obviously people don't start threatening you unless you are onto something which they don't like you talking about. And that, if nothing else, these threats I've received prove this. But from the point of view of other researchers who have turned around and all sorts of things they've said, castigating me and my colleagues who have been involved in this thing, what we've got to look at first of all is when we look at other researchers, we've got to say first of all, what is the quality of their research? What are the resources available to them? Who are their contacts? Because a great many of these so-called researchers, they do no more than sit at a desk in a little cosy office somewhere and make all these amazing announcements, and yet they have no idea whatsoever of what the thing is all about. And it's easy enough, I can sit here and I can criticise everybody in sight from my office, but we go out and get things. We travel the world after information, and we don't just sit in an office and criticise everybody else because they are coming up with something that we can't come up with. What I say is, I have gone into this thing as a serious researcher, as a professional trained investigator. I've approached it from this point of view. We have got contacts in areas where some of these other ufologists would have a baby if they knew the truth of what we've got. So as far as I'm concerned, these other so-called researchers, they can say anything they like, but they will never be true researchers. And it's sad when people work as hard as we do to get the information we do, and then suddenly all these so-called professional researchers come out and say, oh no, this didn't happen, this is a load of rubbish, etc. Another one thing they don't know about this case, and very, very few people do know about this case, is that there was a South African intelligence officer who actually went absent from his country as a result of this case, the leaks coming out on this case. Because the leaks did get out, the person who was responsible in South African intelligence for keeping this thing shrouded in security actually left his post and absconded because he was frightened of the repercussions which would occur as a result of it. That intelligence officer came to England. I'm not talking about Van Grunen now. He came to England and had meetings with us, and he has now assumed a different name and is living in a different country. And there is no more to be said about that. That's as much as I will say about it.
So, your argument for all those people who would and have demanded names, sources, contacts, placements and so on would be what?
There is no way. I am not prepared to put anybody at risk by divulging names. Never, under any circumstances, will I betray anybody who is feeding me secret information. The only way we can get information on the level we get it is for sources of that information to know they are absolutely guaranteed that we would not, under any circumstances, put them in any danger by divulging their names. That is the case, that will always be the case, and if it meant me having to give names out which would put these people in danger, I'd burn this whole South African farm. It's as easy as that. That is not the way we operate.
Now, the most famous UFO crash in UFO history, if you like, has been the Roswell incident, which took place way back in 1947. And to this day, it appears, new witnesses are coming forward. We're talking about an incident which is much more recent, which could potentially be as important, if not more important, than Roswell. But how do you yourself compare the two incidents, and what do you think are the lessons that can be learned from the experiences of having to wait so many years for discovering the truth behind Roswell, that we can put into place now in terms of the Kalahari incident?
Yeah, of course, whenever something like this occurs, I mean, there are many crashes, as we know from various sources, but the problem is whenever something like this occurs, whereby the only reason we get hold of this because somebody leaks some information or something of this nature, immediately the authorities are aware or find out that this information is being leaked, immediately the whole disinformation program starts. Cloud the water, throw them in the wrong direction, do anything to take them off the course they're going in. And the thing about it is that's the whole thing. We must not be deviated from the course that we are taking. And then the big problem then comes is then we have to sort out the wheat from the chaff. What is the true information? What is the false information? And this can only be done by systematic, painstaking inquiries and having the contacts in various areas where you can get directly through to them. Otherwise, you're not going to get anywhere with it. That is the way the whole of the intelligence service is constructed in relation to the disinformation program. They are professionals at what they do. They have offices which are there for no other reason than to give out disinformation. And believe me, they really come active when we get hold of some information of this type of nature. And therefore, what you have to do is you have to make all efforts so that your contacts, when you are making contacts, are going round the outside of these things, not directly through the centre, because if you go directly through the centre, you're going to immediately get disinformation. So you go round by more devious methods, and to do these devious methods, you need certainly you need investigation training, and you need to know the ways of going about these things. And it's the only way we will ever get to the bottom of these things. As far as the South African case is concerned, I don't know how much further we can go with this. We are trying to make more headway into it, but the problem is now all the doors have been closed in our face and there are a great many frightened people about. We are still going at this thing, and I am at this moment in time in touch with a top South African how can I put it, news team who produce programs equivalent to our Panorama and this kind of thing. They have been asking me for information on the South African case in order that they can make inquiries in South Africa, and they have a great many contacts which are South African generals, military intelligence generals and this kind of thing, and they've asked me if I will give them information in relation to this event. They will then cooperate and give me the results of what they get. So I have been liaising with them, but at no stage have I ever given them anybody's name. And I laid this out straight away to them that there was no way I was prepared to divulge names. This liaison is currently going on, and hopefully it will be fruitful. If we do get some information from it which will take us further with this case, you will most certainly hear about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, some of the documents that are going to accompany this video, Tony, are documents that you've obtained through some of your sources. Obviously, we're not going to have an opportunity to look at all of them, and certainly some of the most sensitive. But what kind of information are we likely to see in these documents?
First of all, let me say this: certain documents which have been come into my possession, there are various areas of these documents which I cannot permit anybody to see because it would lead back to the source of the information. There are certain codes on some of these documents which will tell the exact office and everything else that they've come from. Once they can be fed back to that, they can then be traced to people who have been, if you like, taking copies of these documents. So we've got to be extremely careful. So various things will be done, and extracts from the documents you will certainly see. But there are some interesting ones, and one particular one I find of great significance, and this is one, it's headed top secret, and it talks about, it says 28th of May, Nantville shown 2 objects found aboard the craft, believed to be weapons of unknown operation. Now it says Nantville received requests from CIA for photographs of the 2 objects to believed to be weapons. Records found aboard the craft translated by so-and-so, alien entities hostile towards mankind. Advised Dr. so-and-so to find solution as to the ultimate intentions of the entities. That is, you won't be able to see much on the video, but that is one of the documents, and that is one that will be put in as part of the package for the South African incident. There are other documents there. There's one here when we were talking about Project Pantry, when it says we agree that the Project Pantry should remain out of their hands due to the uncomfortable situation we are in due to the security leaks by a South African intelligence officer who is at present on the run. So that's where the Project Pantry came in. There is one here where it was from when we spoke about Mr. Blackmore. Now this is headed from the head of counterintelligence with regards to the unidentified wreckage we obtained. Please keep us informed as to the whereabouts and movements of the intelligence officer who leaked security information regarding the crash. The individual in question is known to have received help from a group of individuals in the United Kingdom and possibly Canada. One of these individuals who helped him called our embassy in regards to the case. Please keep us informed of the status of the investigations. Then it is signed Colonel Blackmore, Intelligence Division, London. And this is what we were saying, because the only place in London is the South African embassy. And when we checked there, of course they're not, as we said, not entitled to military personnel there, but we found that there is a Mr. Blackmore. He works out of the embassy, he's called Mr. Blackmore, and there is no official military attaché at the embassy, but Mr. Blackmore operates out of the embassy. So that's another thing. These things all come together. This particular one, headed top secret, the craft in question should be removed to a more secure location due to recent security links. All personnel involved in this, it should take effect immediately. Let me see, this one here. It says, it is better for all of us, Doctor, if in cooperation with the government try to muddy the waters regarding this case. In response to your letter, I do agree from our point of view that it would be the right course of action to take. I have no need of this document from the DIA regarding NIDA. We have been offered access to government documents on this matter. We look forward to your report.
Tony,
So
a few documents there, perhaps for the benefit of the cameras, we can have a look at the thickness of the actual South African file. I think it would be very good to draw a comparison.
Yeah, I think this is this is all the South African file and everything that refers to it, and so you can imagine that the amount of work which has gone into this, and every piece of paper in here has some relevance to this South African case. In fact, a great deal of relevance, else we wouldn't have it here. There are all sorts of things referred to, even as much as where we approach the Rand Corporation in America about the production of maser weapons. And it might interest you to know that the Rand Corporation sent us some documentation which stated that they were working on these maser weapons in 1954. Now, if they were working on them at that time, can you imagine how advanced they are now? And we have official documentation talking all about that aspect of it. So there was no angle which was not covered in our investigations on this.
So perhaps now's an opportune time to summarise, if we may. We've listened to everything that you've had to say about this particular case, but let me try and, if you like, fall back on your former police service experience. You've said that you were a trained investigator, and obviously that stems from 25 years as a serving police officer.
Correct, yeah.
You've obviously dealt with many people hundreds, thousands of people who at one stage or another have made their way to the courts for various crimes and such like over the years, but nonetheless each of those cases would have had a case file.
Sure.
So let's look at it in this term. Here you have a case file. You're an investigator. Are you convinced, having gone through this case now over a period of the last 4 years, that this South African case is absolutely 100% genuine?
As genuine as anybody can ever hope to get it with the information which is available in this file, yes. We would like obviously more information to totally sew the thing up. But if all I can say is, if I was dealing with a case in a court in this country, with the information I've got here, I could successfully prosecute somebody with the information I've got available, which would prove that the case was there on that balance, yes. And all I can say is, you know, maybe one day the whole thing will come out. I hope it does come out, because then I'll be able to turn around and say, well, after all the lambasting I took from all these so-called investigators, oh, it never happened, etc., etc. I wonder what would happen when if it turns out and they say, well, they actually release information, say, yeah, well, this crash did occur. I wonder about what all these investigators who have turned out and said it never occurred. Will they be the first ones to turn around and hold their hands up? I wonder.